right, David. Well, first I want to just say thank you for doing this. I have wanted to meet you for months. It's really great to be in here and to get a chance to talk to you at length about what you're up to. Welcome to the show. It's really great to meet you.
Thank you. Good to meet you. Happy to be doing this.
Thank you, man. I would love to start at the beginning for you. And I know a decent amount about your biography. It seems like you've had a meandering road to this point in your life.
That's one way to put it.
Yes. If you could maybe start at the beginning of a narrative that makes sense to you as to what is bringing you, to the work you're doing now, to this table. How did that start? How do you articulate that story when someone asks you that?
Well, I was, I'm from Mississippi. I was born in 1955 and grew up in Mississippi. And the big experience for me was being a member of my church and becoming, involved as a young white guy and trying to think about the race issue, because this was during the middle of the civil rights era. And my family was split on it. Most of my family was at that time in the 60s, were pro-segregation. Some weren't. And I think that I had a thing of early on wanting to kind of keep people together. You don't want your family to break up. So I think that had an influence. Clearly, the civil rights movement had a kind of morally important experience for me. And then growing up in a place where most white people were strongly opposed to it, I think that was a big shaping experience. And then in my life, I mean, the way I see it from the inside is I've spent most of my life trying in one way or another to bring differing parts of things together, so whether it's liberals or conservatives or interdisciplinary academic work, or I've always been interested in kind of work that, brings people who don't see the world the same way together. To me, that's been a consistent thing. Now, sometimes I've failed. I've been involved in things where that has been attempted but failed. But it's always been, usually it's been kind of there for me, So I've never had a regular job. I've never applied for a job. I've never had a boss. I've never, filled out an application. I've only done one thing in my life, starting when I was 15. I started basically social change-oriented organizations. And I started them and led them and then started another one. That's all I've ever done. So in some ways, there's been that constant. And I think the one thing I think's been a constant in terms of substance is look for the common good by bringing people together across some kind of difference. And sometimes having that not work and sometimes having that work.
And I want to talk eventually during this conversation about now. And I think it's easy to have a recency bias where people who are around now think that this is the worst time polarization has ever been in this country. And I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that, and maybe to speak specifically as to your work in your life, in the spirit of trying to bring people together, what those arcs looked like for you personally when you were doing various works. Obviously today, it seems like the political tribalism is an area of interest to you. Are there other elements of culture that you felt like in various decades needed help to bring people together to make a better society?
These things kind of go in waves, I mean, my academic training is in history, and I've always been a kind of history person. So I think the most polarized era in American history was in the 1850s, of course, leading up to the Civil War.
Yeah.
You had 500,000 people die because we couldn't get along together and disagreed over things. And then when I was a kid in the 1960s, that was also I think we were more polarized in the 60s than we are now. I mean, not just the civil rights movement, but maybe even as much or more so the Vietnam War was a period of intense polarization along political lines, along generational lines, along class lines, along race lines. And then I think now is maybe the third big era of polarization. And I think what makes today's polarization different than earlier periods where polarization was high is because it's not just around one or two issues. Today we seem to be polarized on everything. I mean, everything. Clothes, whether to wear a mask. I mean, everything. There's nothing that doesn't kind of get run through this grid of tribal, I try not to use that word, of group, team loyalties and whereas in the 1850s it was slavery, in the 1960s it was mostly, I think, Vietnam and sort of race broadly defined, but now it's everything. Yeah. And so I think that's what's distinctive about today's polarization is you just can't avoid it. It's just everywhere.
Yeah. Both of those first two examples you mentioned involved massive violence, right? The Civil War was domestically and the Vietnam War was in Southeast Asia, but still hundreds of thousands of people died. I think in the spirit of this show, part of the idea here is to have better conversations or conversations that can lower the temperature or mitigate the risk of social upheaval, social violence. When you look at where we are right now in terms of the polarization in society, what tactics, if any, that have worked? I've told a lot of people I was going to be meeting you, and everyone was interested, but everyone was had a degree of disbelief that it could actually be accomplished. Creating a society where people who vehemently disagree with each other could still get along well.
Right.
Are there tactics that you have found really do work in attempting to achieve that aim?
Yes. The main thing that I see working is when you can bring together in either one-on-one or small groups people who really disagree really deeply about things, and you can put them in an experience where they actually are talking with each other as opposed to talking about each other, or there has to be a structure to it. We got our model and our work mostly from family therapy because some of the people that helped design our program had a background in family therapy. And in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a kind of a movement within family therapy that really creative people said, well, now, wait a minute. Families in crisis, there are certain really kind of therapeutic methods that you can use to help a family in crisis or a couple on the brink of divorce. What if we tried some of those same methods with, groups in conflict as opposed to couples? What if we wanted to prevent a civic divorce? Yeah. And so we found that works, and a lot of it has to do with, things that aren't that complicated. It's just that, like, one of our rules is that when we talk to other people you're not trying to persuade them to change their mind. It's not a debate about the issue. So we go into the conversation where neither one of us, and we agree to this in advance, we're not trying to win the other person over to my correct view. It's about really the opportunity to tell you what I think, and the opportunity for you to tell me what you think, and for us to see what are the differences and where is the common ground, if there is any. And in the process, we become human beings rather than stick figures. We almost always find out that there's more common ground than we realized. We usually find out that we have something to like about each other, even though we don't agree. We become human beings, rather than stereotypes. And that works. I mean, we measure this. We have thousands of people who've gone through this. And we do pre and post. It definitely works. You're less angry, less polarized after having gone through this. So then we encourage people to form local groups in the community to keep doing it we form chapters, basically. We call them alliances. We now have 73 of them around the country. We have 10,000 dues-paying members. So people, there's a hunger for this. I think there's a kind of a heart sickness out there among a lot of people. They just don't quite have a sense of they can do something about it. Yeah. So we give them a chance to do something about it. So we know that works. And now the trick for us is whether or not that same method can be taken into the halls of power. Like, would that work in Congress? Would that work in media? Would that work on college and university campuses? I mean, could you actually take what we know works at the citizen-to-citizen level and begin to affect institutions? Now, we don't know that yet, but that's what we're going to try to do. That's what we're trying to do now. And I think it's going to work. I don't see why it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Some people are skeptical about that, but I think it needs to be done whether it works or not. Most interesting things that happen in the world don't happen because somebody calculated the odds. They read the tea leaves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Most interesting things happen because people feel the need to do something regardless of how it turns out.
Yeah.
So we feel the need to do this regardless of how it turns out.
Yeah.
But so far, it has produced some good results.
That's great to hear. And I want to get into the details eventually in the conversation about what exactly you do during these sessions. To back up a little bit related to your story and the story that leads you to lead this organization here, in the little I know about your biography, it does seem like you have experienced at various points in your life you've changed your mind about some major topics that were once very important to you. And I think any evolving person, if they're being honest with themselves, would recognize that has happened to them too. That you never quite know where your beliefs are going to go as you get older, as you get exposed to new ideas, new people. If you could, maybe we can start with Prop 8 and where you were at that time. That seems like almost a generation or two ago now.
Not to me, brother.
Yeah.
Seemed like yesterday to me.
So that is something, as I understand it, is a subject on which you did change your mind. And I'd be curious to get in as much detail as you're willing to share how that happened for you, what your thinking was, how it evolved, and how that maybe applies to the work you're doing now.
Yeah, it definitely applies. I started a think tank in 1987 called Institute for American Values. And it was a think tank, and our job was to study civil society, and by civil society, we mean organizations, sort of levels of association that exist between the individual and the state. Mm-hmm. So families would be one, religious institutions, father, daughter, Sunday breakfast, just grew, Edmund Burke called them the little platoons. Yeah. Some scholars call them intermediate institutions. And, Robert Putnam famously wrote about them in a book called Bowling Alone, about the decline of these institutions. It's causing some of the problems we're having today. Well, anyway, I spent 30 years just thinking about this. Yeah. And the main thing I was thinking about was families. And within families, the main thing I was thinking about was fathers, the role of fathers. And about the time I became a father myself, I wrote a book about the role of fathers, and it was a big thing for me. I mean, I just spent years and years and years on this, I mean, I was like a jukebox. You didn't even have to put a nickel in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then in 2002, I had been into this for a while. And along comes gay marriage emerges onto the national agenda because of a Supreme Judicial Court decision in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you know, and I'm older than you. So, I mean, I think for probably people your age, this has always been just kind of normal.
Yeah.
Well, like gay marriage is probably not that big a deal for you, I'm guessing. Maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know if it is or
Yeah,
it
it's
isn't,
true.
but for many young people, it's just not that big a deal. It was a big deal for an older generation. We'd never heard of it. It never even occurred to us.
Yeah.
And I've made friends with lots of gay leaders. It had never occurred to them either. It just got sort of thought of. Andrew Sullivan, my friend Jonathan Rausch. I mean, there'd been some pioneer writing going back to the 50s and 60s, but in general, it was an entirely new idea.
Yeah.
And so it popped up after having spent about a decade being sort of developed by gay writers and thinkers, particularly Andrew Sullivan, and others, Evan Wolfson, Jonathan Rausch. There, you know, but really a handful of other kind of public intellectuals. This got legs and became legally viable, and then in Massachusetts in 2002, boom. And so people like me who had spent years, family this and marriage that and fatherhood this, all of a sudden we were being called upon to have an opinion about a subject that we had never given a nanosecond's thought to.
Yeah.
And I remember getting a call. I remember so vividly. I didn't want to say anything about it because A, I didn't think I knew anything about it. B, I didn't even take it that seriously, really. So I got a call from a reporter from USA Today who said, there's a study out from some academics that says children don't really need their fathers to develop normally. And I said, well, who in the heck? Oh, and they said, not only that, they said, scholars agree. I was, well, that's crazy. Who said that? And he said, well, it's this group promoting gay marriage. And I said, well, no, I don't, forget it. I don't want to go there. I don't want to say anything about this subject. Call somebody else. And so I'll never forget Karen Peterson, a reporter. She said, oh, so you're Mr. Father. You're the guy who claims to know about this. You're the guy that spent years of his life traveling around the country talking about this very exact subject. And a bunch of people have now come out to say something about your topic, fathers, that you think is wrong, and you're not going to go on the record on it. Okay, Karen. I'll go on the record. That's not true. What they say is simply not true. It's not, they can say children don't need their fathers, but it's not true that academics agree that children don't need their fathers. I mean, I had spent years. Anyway, so she put it in the paper. And because I was sort of in the public eye, all of a sudden I'm against gay marriage. And so it's hard to say to people who didn't have that experience directly just how intense people's feelings were about this. Yeah. This was not something that people took lightly. I mean, there was a generation of people who this was the moral issue of their youth. And I don't mean just gay and lesbian people. I mean a lot of straight people were like refusing to get married themselves. Until gay and lesbian, like this was a very deeply felt thing. And so I got caught up in it and didn't really want to be, but so I said, okay, well, I better say something about it. So I literally took about a year to think and read, mostly in anthropology, and ended up writing a book called The Future of Marriage. And about half of the book was concerned with gay marriage. And I said in the book, there are reasons to be for it, there are reasons to be against it, but in my opinion, the reasons to be against it are stronger than the reasons to be for it. That's what I said. And so I became kind of, I became an anti-gay marriage guy. And it's about the only subject anybody wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Everything else is this one. So then you mentioned 2010, there was a referendum in California that passed that effectively outlawed gay marriage in California. Well, this was challenged in the courts, and it was Proposition 8 was the ballot initiative. That the validity of that ballot initiative was challenged in the court, and it was called the Prop 8 trial, and it was the most famous court case up until that point concerning gay marriage. And they asked me to be a witness in the trial to say what I thought. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And I said, is anybody else going to do this? And they said, oh, yeah, we have this person, that person, all these people. I said, oh, that's okay. I know and respect a lot of these people. They were prominent people, So then they called me up about 2 weeks before the court hearing and said, they've all stepped down. None of them they've all backed out. Why'd they back out? Well, the judge has, in general, they don't want to be vilified in the public eye. But specifically, the Judge Walker, has decided to televise the hearings and to make public the thing. So none of them wanted that. So the guy said, well, you could leave too. I understand. No, I'll do this. So I knew going into it that it would be an absolutely horrible experience. I would be squashed like a bug, But I just figured, well, it's a federal court. They've asked me to say what I think. I've spent 20 years deciding what I think, and I'm really going to be – it's like talking to Karen Peter. I'm really going to be such a coward that I'm not going to say what I think. So with I think, somewhat full knowledge of what was about to happen, I went and was in the trial, and I thought I had a good experience on the stand. David Boies was the cross-examiner. He's a famous lawyer. And we spent 2 days talking to one another, and he was very assertive in his examination of me. But I was, I thought I actually enjoyed it, and we thought intellectually rigorous thing. Well, of course, in the publicity that came out about it afterwards, it was all like I was a bigot. Frank Rich at the New York Times wrote not one, not two, but 3 long articles just calling me a bigot. And I was doing it for money. I was doing it because I hated gay people. And my children read those articles. They were like 10, 12 years old at the time. So they're reading articles in the newspaper saying their father's a bigot. And this was happening to me hundreds of times a day, social media, everything. Like I became a poster boy for being a bigot. And so it wasn't a lot of fun. Now I was never, nobody ever threatened me physically. Nobody could fire me, or at least directly. So that went on for about 1 or 2 years, and then early on, I had made. A guy reached out to me. His name is Jonathan Rausch, and he wrote a book about the same time my book came out, a little bit earlier actually, called Gay Marriage, Why It's Good for Gays, Good for Straights, and Good for America. He's a gay man, journalist. He works at the Brookings Institution. And we began as kind of going around the country in these debates. He's pro, I'm anti. But what happened was am I going on too long?
No, please.
Okay. We're sitting in we were in Athens, Georgia, after a typical boom, boom debate. It starts pouring down rain, and we both have to go to Atlanta for the airport, and I have a car and he doesn't. Okay, I'll give you a ride. Get in the car. pouring down rain, bumper to bumper traffic. We're in the car for like 3 hours in like pouring rain, bumper to bumper traffic going to Atlanta. We could have walked faster, you know. But what was really interesting is that we began to actually talk about things other than why you're wrong about gay marriage, you know. So so at the end of that thing, I remember he got out of the car and he said, "This has been really an interesting thing that we've just had here." I said, "Yeah, it really has, John." So that really, we became friends. I visited him in his home. I met his partner, Michael, who's now his husband. We convened off-the-record sessions where 10 pro-gay marriage leaders and 10 anti-gay marriage leaders met off the record for weekends. He and I co-wrote articles about we don't agree on gay marriage, but we can agree on civil unions, which was a kind of a stopgap thing that some states were considering. So what happened, and then he introduced me to other people. Dale Carpenter, who had written a great scholarly book on the legal history, and William Eskridge, a law professor at Yale, who was a big muckety-muck on the legal development issues, all gay men pro-gay marriage. And but it was really with John that I became friends, and it was really a transformative thing for me. You know, it really was. And the one thing he never did privately was try to beat me up about my views. He never even remotely insinuated that I was a bigot or bad person, motivated by ill will, doing it for money. He never said what everybody else in the whole wide world was saying, it seemed to me, on the other side. So in 2012, I decided to say to the world that I had changed my mind on the issue of gay marriage. And because I had. And I hadn't changed anything I thought about marriage. I hadn't read any new studies. I hadn't, nobody presented me with new facts. But because of the relationship with him and because I met some other people, I felt that I had not really understood the lived experience of gay and lesbian people. I had just been kind of an abstraction. I had this kind of wall of knowledge or something, my research. I had books. I had this kind of protective barrier of intellectual thing. I was a little bit bulletproof in terms of, but it was the relationships that started with my friendship with John that really got me to think that I just felt I experienced a thing in a new way. I experienced the balance of good, bad in a different way. I gave more attention. I don't know quite how to say it. Just more awareness of the fact that these people just wanted to have a legal connection to the person they loved. And it was like, this is really bad, So I wrote an article, and because I had been in the public eye a lot, it was a big deal when I wrote the article. It was a big thing in the New York, a big profile in the New York Times. Gay marriage opponent changes sides, big victory for gay marriage. And so all the people that had been calling me a bigot for a couple of years stopped doing that. But then all the people that told me I was such a wonderful person for being against gay marriage started calling me horrible names, just sold out, threw us under the bus, succumbed to pressure, have no backbone, must be getting money from somebody. So the organization I had run for 30 years fell apart. All the funding dried up. The board members quit. It was just a whole collapse. And so I was just kind of by myself. It's kind of dark night of the soul. What am I going to do? I mean, good grief. I seem to have been one of the few people that managed to just outrage everybody on the subject, So I started working with John on really what became Braver Angels, because we thought, well, gosh, it's not just on gay marriage.
Yeah.
The country's splitting apart on so many areas, and so he's now, I talk to him all the time. I talked to him this week about, and he helps me with fundraising. He was on our board, one of our founding board members, and so that very searing experience that I had, where an effort to unify people around support for marriage failed. A 20-year effort of mine failed spectacularly, failed in a highly dramatic way, had all kinds of financial, personal, losing friendships of many years. It was not a fun experience, although it was probably not that. I mean, many people went through. So I'm not saying I was unique, but anyway, it was not an experience I'd like to have again. But so that led to what I'm doing now, where I thought, well, okay, I got a little gas left in the tank. Let's try to do this right. Let's try to see if we can do something at the grassroots level that really can, I guess to some people, just kind of reproduce what happened with me and John around the gay marriage issue.
Yeah.
So that's a very long-winded answer, but the only other thing I'll say about that is what I learned. One of the many things I learned is if you change your mind about something, you will be roasted.
Yeah.
No one, and I mean no one, believes you're in good faith. And that's a sign of I'm forgetting me.
Yeah.
I'm saying that's a sign of a society that's not functioning well, right? Because when no one is allowed to change their mind about anything without having their head cut off, this is an indicator that something's not working right. Because, again, taking me out of it.
Yeah.
But if you just tell everybody in public life that the one thing that will destroy them forever is to change their mind about something, that's good. Societies don't work that way.
Yeah.
So.
It sounds like you were canceled before people were canceled, and that you can, I would imagine, have empathy for people now who say the wrong thing or said the wrong thing years ago that leads to all of the kind of name calling and backlash that you received. And I wonder, with the point you just made, that a society that does not act in good faith, that does not allow its citizens to change their mind without major repercussions, there's a sickness there, I think, is what you're getting at. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on what is causing that. Why are we seemingly at that point right now where that is a kind of fact about the culture?
Yeah, I feel like I really know the answer to that. I don't really know anybody who does. We're living in an age of intolerance. We don't tolerate disagreement. If you disagree with me about a political issue that I consider to be important, I want to destroy you. I want to excommunicate you from the group. I want you fired. I want harm to befall you as punishment for moral transgressions. And when you experience this on a big scale, I don't know if you during the Clinton presidency, remember Monica Lewinsky,
Sure.
The intern, that there was some kind of sexual relationship between her and President Clinton. Well, I never paid much attention to it. I mean, I followed it in the news, but it never occurred to me to try to put myself in her shoes. Like, what was that like? Well, I've since found out. I'll tell you what it was like. it was what happened to me, only 1,000 times worse. She had literally millions of people around the world raining down the worst kind of hatred on her. People who hardly knew anything about what happened, obviously didn't know her, but spent a considerable amount of time abusing her in every possible way they could think of. And unless you've been through something like that, you really don't quite know what that's like. And so, yes, I have tremendous sympathy for people who go through this. And it's not a good, it's nothing we should be proud of, that we treat people like Monica Lewinsky that way. I mean, leaving aside whether what she did was right or wrong, leaving aside, whether or not the person who's being wiped out, whether maybe they did do something wrong. I mean, I guess often they did. Let's say I did. Let's say, which I think is true. Let's say I was, I didn't think I was bigoted, but let's say I was. Let's just say I was. Well, there's a way to engage people who you think are acting in bigoted ways that I think is responsible, is morally responsible, maybe even morally required. But the way we do it now is not one of them. It's just not one of them. It wasn't the way to engage Monica Lewinsky. It certainly wasn't the way to engage me, except when John Roush and, because he communicated to me that he cared about me. Yeah. To me, that's the essence of the thing. Like, let's say I think have a terrible view on something. Well, if all I do is start pointing my finger at you and calling you names, racist, terrible, Dan's a racist. Dan did this racist thing? Let's get rid of Dan. He'll pollute us all by being his racist self, Well, first of all, it will not make you any less of a racist. That's the one thing we know. It never, ever works. Nobody ever changes their mind on the basis of just being pounded and yelled at and berated and denigrated and humiliated. But if I came to you sincerely and let you know that I cared about you as a human being, that I had an inward desire to do good to you, that was my goal. To do good to you because you're a human being made in the image of God, and I wanted to do that. And part of that relationship was telling you why I disagreed with you about whatever it is we disagree with. Then there would be a chance that you might change your thinking or at least be more aware of mine, or, something good could happen in the world. So it's not like I never tell you, it's not like I'm not supposed to, I guess, confront you or to, have you engage about differences, but it has to be preceded by your confidence that I actually care about you. Yeah. Otherwise, why would you give a shit what I think about anything? Yeah. And who put me in the position of being able to tell you what's good or bad about you when you know very well I don't even care about you? No. You're just a datum to me. You're just an object for me that I can stand on to beat my chest or to signal my virtue. Yeah. Yeah. So,
and because the way that you described what happened to you, I think what is increasingly happening to people who have views that are out of step with the acceptable viewpoints currently in culture are, it's like a religious purity test. There's something about the condemnation that is reminiscent to me of fundamentalism, of a violation. You used the word transgression earlier, that it's a violation of some like religious code, tribal code. And
I think there's a lot of truth to that. And you said what's causing it. And I said I didn't really know, and then we kind of got off on something. But I will say one thing that I've thought about a lot that's very close to what you just said, which is that when, sometimes people have defined religion as whatever value you have that's the highest.
Yeah.
Your highest value
Yeah.
is real. That's why some people say everybody has some religion, in the sense that everybody has something that they think is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Well, with Christians, what's the purpose of, to love God and enjoy Him forever. For a communist, it's the revolution. Everybody has something that's their ultimate thing.
Yeah.
And when moral and religious things recede in importance, which I think they have in the society, when the sort of civil religion of society that used to say things like, there was a kind of Peter Bricker called it a moral canopy. Whenever that canopy moves away, kind of attenuates, what rises to the top is politics. Politics becomes the highest thing. So the highest purpose of my life is to advance my political agenda. It's not to, go to church, always tell the truth, early to bed, early to rise, treat your neighbor as yourself, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Those are not the things anymore.
No.
The thing is advance my political agenda. And so crushing you in order to advance my political agenda all of a sudden is, why not?
Yeah.
And I do think that explains some of the reason why we see the intensification of conflict about this, because there's no higher set of values to which politics is accountable. There's nothing up there governing the behavior. The only thing is winning. It's like that James Carville book called All's Fair. That was he's a big political strategist. All's fair. He meant it.
Yeah.
He meant everything is fair because the stakes are so high. The future of the world depends upon it. And if it means crushing you, small price to pay.
Yeah. You use, I think if I heard you correctly, the phrase a social canopy, or I think you use the
moral
word
canopy.
Moral canopy.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to, tease that out a little bit in terms of, and I don't know if there's a time frame you think about where there's a delineation that's clear in your mind where we began to lose some of those, whatever you want to call that, social virtues, collective belief in concepts like that. But what are those specifically, or what were they that you think kept some of the political stridency at bay, or had for a period of American history?
Well, the scholars in the mid-20th century would they would often use the term civil religion.
Yeah.
There were a whole series of very influential books with that phrase in it. Robert Bella and others, spent student of religion, wonderful guy I got to be friends with later in his life. And it meant that you would take the Abrahamic inheritance, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. At that point, it was really what they would have called Catholic Protestant Jew. Will Herberg wrote a famous book called Catholic Protestant Jew. But now you would think of it as, you would probably include Islam, and you would say, okay, you take the moral and spiritual values of that, roughly speaking, biblical culture, and that becomes a kind of set of reference points, or a set of orienting points for all political behavior, or all behavior, including political behavior. So one of the things you would do is you're not supposed to tell lies. So if you tell a lie, which of course people do, you're supposed to try to hide it. And if you get caught, you're supposed to be ashamed.
Mm.
But basically what you're supposed to do is not tell lies. Well, what if that no longer applies? I mean, I'm not trying to make a partisan point here. I know lots of people in my own family and world and organization think that President Trump was a good president. But President Trump was really indifferent to telling lies. He thought telling lies was fine. And I think that's hard to dispute. Mm. Okay. What happens when, or if you want to go back to Bill Clinton told a lot of lies, I think. Again, not trying to make a partisan point here, but what if people in high public life just don't mind telling lies? And when they get caught, they don't seem to be ashamed. Well, that's a violation of that civil religion code. Another one is that you're supposed to treat other people with respect, even if you think that you're supposed to assume good faith. Because the religious idea is that we're all made in the image of God. So when I look at, from a religious point of view, if I look at you, if I'm a Christian, if I look at you, I'm supposed to see Jesus. Yeah. That's really the idea for a Christian. Jews say it in a different way. Muslims say it in their way, but it's the same idea. It means we're all a part of a sacred image, and you don't desecrate. You don't treat. Even there's a secular version of it, Kantian. It says that you never treat another person merely as a means. You always treat them as an end. They're an end in themselves. Their good is something that is an end in itself, not just a instrumentality for you to achieve. Well, what if that goes? Yeah. What if that gets thrown out the window? Yeah. And there's a whole series of these, I would say, restraints. Usually they're considered to be restraints on the desire to dominate others, which is a deep human desire. So these moral and spiritual restraints are increasingly no longer there. And so we're just fighting for our political agenda with a lot more arrows in our quiver, a lot more weapons, a lot more things you can do to harm your enemies and advance your side. And I think that's what we've seen. And now I don't know the degree to which secularization has contributed to that. I mean, now you have a very large number of Americans who have, I just think it's obvious that the influence of Abrahamic religion is declining in America, institutionally, personally. I mean, I don't think it's open to debate. Yeah. And so, and I'm not saying there aren't strong secular moralities. I'm not saying there aren't wonderful people who are not religious who have better moral behavior than I do, for example. Mm-hmm. I'm not denying any of that, but I am observing that what they used to call the civil religion, which were restraints that everyone was supposed to be accountable to, right? Yeah. Not just Republicans, not just Democrats, everybody. Yeah. And so if you're a Republican and you see a Democrat do a bad thing, if you're a Republican and you see a Republican violate this, you're supposed to say, bad Republican, don't do that anymore, even though it's a member of your party. Same with Democrats. Yeah. When's the last time you saw that happen? About anything or anybody? Yeah. It just doesn't happen anymore. Right. So if I wanted to pick a cause, that would be on my top 5 list. The weakening of a shared, I'm going to say, civil religion. Yeah.
And do you point to a certain moment, a certain time period in which that began to unravel in your judgment?
I think it began to unravel. And here I'm with Robert Putnam a little bit. He wrote a book called The swing, although it's kind of ironically titled because it's really about the downswing.
Yeah.
And he says the deterioration in these communal values that he's talking about really began in the mid 60s and late 60s. That's when he would trace it. And he has, chapter after chapter with all the data. And I think that's basically right. I mean, I think a lot of things that happened in the 60s were absolutely great. You had the civil rights movement. You had that was the 50s and maybe through the mid 50s through the mid 60s mainly. And the women's movement, the environmental movement. So I'm not saying everything was bad about the 60s. I am saying that I think some of these things began to break apart then. I mean, think about public lying, right? I think it was absolutely shocking for millions of Americans who came to the belief that President Lyndon Johnson was regularly lying to the people about Vietnam. And millions of them, I was one of them, who supported him politically over Barry Goldwater, the guy he beat.
Yeah.
But, we actually have a president who stands up and tells lies. And a lot of people felt that way about President Nixon. A lot of people felt that way about President Clinton, including me. A lot of people feel that way about former President Trump. And it's hard to understand the body blow that is to social trust, right? There was a song, and I learned it when I was a little kid. What did you learn in school today? What did you learn in school today, dear little boys of mine? And I learned that Washington never told a lie. I learned that everybody's free, and that's what the teacher said to me. Our leaders are the best of men, and so we elect them again and again. That's what I learned in school today. Well, forget that.
Yeah.
Nobody's singing that song.
Yeah.
So I think it was, and also there were the social change that began to accelerate in the 60s does. Even very productive social change sometimes causes people to lose their trust in each other. I don't know all the reasons, and I don't really usually believe in kind of periodization where you say, this is when it. But if I had to pick a point where trust began to decline, in the early 60s, if you ask Americans, do you think our political leaders are generally trying to do what's best for the country?
Yeah.
I think like 80% of Americans said yes. I don't think you get 20% who say that anymore.
Yeah.
Right? So our trust that even if we don't like them, they're generally speaking trying to do what's good for the country. It was here, boom, now it's here. And that fall, you can see it in the data, really began in the 60s.
Yeah. This is a conversation in part, I personally agree with everything you said. It's disturbing. It has been just personally disturbing to see, even in my lifetime, I think a noticeable decline in social trust and in the quality of dialogue, the idea of giving people the benefit of the doubt, of believing that they're coming from the right place, a good place, that you have more in common with one another as of your own citizens, your fellow citizens, than you do disagreements. And I want to get into some of the nitty gritty, the details of the work you're doing here, the aims of the organization. Maybe if we could start to kind of put a bow on what we had just been speaking about. To my lights, there is a role that new technologies have played in exacerbating some of these underlying issues.
I think you're right.
It's just something that I would imagine you've thought a lot about. And I think that, the term echo chamber is rampant. It's well known. It's talked about, I think, rather often now in America. From your perspective, what is the role of the smartphone, the social media platforms, what has just hit our culture with great force in the last 10 years? What has that done to affect the dialogue, the trust levels, the ability for people here who disagree with each other about certain things to no longer be able to regard people who they inevitably are going to disagree with about something as worthy of respect, worthy of dialogue, worthy of believing that they're coming from a good place?
Yeah. Well, in our work, and when we ask people who come to our events what they think is causing it, usually that's the first thing they mention is the role of the media. I mean, I can think of two big aspects of it. I'm sure there are more, but one is the ability to customize your news. I mean, you can. It was much harder in earlier generations to only encounter things that reinforced your own views. Now, because of the algorithms of social media and because of the ability for me to just customize what my consumption is of news and opinion, I can never encounter anything other than that reinforces my existing beliefs. I mean, I don't have to ever be exposed to anything other than that which says, David, you're absolutely right about everything except it's actually worse than you thought.
Yeah.
And so, shame on us in a certain way for doing that, because we have to participate in that. And then, of course, the Facebook and Twitter, I think, and others have algorithms to reinforce that to once they figure out that you like articles that have the word green in them, they're going to give you more and more articles that have the word green in them. And that's something that maybe they're contributing to. But the new media, the digital media, allow us to customize our news consumption in ways that earlier generations were just not able to do.
Yeah.
So we're only, in other words, we're not so much informed as we are riled up, right? It's because it's not about telling you something you don't know.
Yeah.
It's just about getting you angrier about it.
Yeah.
Intensifying your emotions about it, right? So I think that's one part of it. The other, another part of it, I think, is the shift from analog to social involved a massive decline of the influence of journalistic standards. There used to be a time, children, many years ago, where certain conventions obtained in the world of journalism and media, broadcast media, that were intended to serve good social purposes, and generally speaking did. There used to be a thing called fact-checking. You would submit an article to the editor. The editor's job was to make sure that you weren't saying crazy things in the article that were just factually wrong. Well, that's gone. I mean, a few places still do it, but most media that we consume today, they're not fact-checked. There was a notion of journalistic balance, the idea that you're supposed to, in good faith, have opposing views represented in your presentation. No one does that anymore. I mean, except weirdos, people who are just weird. There are some others, but I think fact-checking and in generally editing, generally most things that we would consume earlier would, in one way or another, there was an editor who had to approve it and then to say, this is an inflammatory paragraph, take it out. This is not clear, make it clear. You're writing an article about something that happened last night and World War III broke out last night and you didn't mention it, put it in there.
Yeah.
But those people don't exist anymore for most of the media we consume. So I just think part of it has just been a flagrant abandonment of all of these historic practices that kept things from going off the rails. And now, in the digital era, anybody can publish anything and does.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what it is. You can just say the craziest thing possible. It's out there.
Yeah.
So I think that contributes to a kind of disorientation. I don't think we're even beginning yet to understand just how disorienting that is, But when people say, a lot of people say now, they say, when I was arguing with somebody I didn't agree with, what it felt emotionally like was we were arguing about a country that we both recognized.
Yeah.
No longer. It's like we live in different countries with completely mutually unrecognizable. Like, I ask you, what happened in America yesterday? And you're going to say A, B, C, D. And then you ask me, what happened in America yesterday? I'm going to tell you something that could not be further from what you just said. And so I think the combination of these two things, customizing your news consumption and no standards of journalism anymore, where people just say all kinds of crazy stuff and there's no regulation of it, I think it ultimately contributes to that, almost that feeling of vertigo.
Yeah.
Right? Like, really? Are we both here in this country now? We're in the same country,
If what you're saying is true, and I think there's good reason to believe it is, we're in trouble. This is a time of potential great peril for America, and
I think we're in danger of losing some very important things. Yeah. I think we're on a precipice of some kind.
I want to get into the moment for you of deciding that an organization like this needed to exist in the first place, and then I want to get into the details of the sessions that you run and the potentially some of the hopeful learnings that have been obtained through these sessions. My understanding is that Braver Angels came into existence around 2016, which obviously was an important turning point in American history, or at least a noteworthy turning point in American history. What happened to you? What did you see? What triggered the belief and the energy in you that made you think a place like this needs to exist? And maybe if you could just broadly outline the mission, the goals of the organization first, and speak to that would be, I think, useful to kind of segue into the specifics of what Braver Angels is up to.
Well, we say that our mission is to bridge the political divide and strengthen our democratic republic. So we want to bring people together across the partisan divide to build relationships with one another, not to change each other's minds and not to form positions on issues, but to rebuild a kind of civic friendship and to try to strengthen the bases of our American government, which are at risk because of these trends. We began experimenting in 2015. John and I pulled together people on both sides of the gay marriage debate. This was after the Obergefell decision that legalized gay marriage, the Supreme Court decision. But the follow-up to that was a huge, intensely felt arguments over what came to be known as religious liberty and gay rights. The perceived tension between religious liberty and gay rights. And so we brought together some discussions, and they were good discussions, people on both sides of that issue. Again, is there some common ground? Do we really have to hate each other? That kind of thing. But what really began Braver Angels in the work we do now was it was just a very specific occurrence. The day after the 2016 election, I called a friend of mine, David Lapp, who lives in South Lebanon, Ohio, with his family. And I had known David had worked with me at the Institute for American Values since he was in college. college. And so we knew each other. And he had gone out to South Lebanon to work on a research project with his wife on young working class 20-somethings and how they're thinking about life. And so anyway, I called him up on the day of the election, and I said, David, how are things in South Lebanon? He said, it's pretty good, you know. He said our county went 70% for Trump.
Yeah.
And there's David is a conservative, and he said, there's a lot people are feeling pretty, most people in my little circle are feeling pretty good. He said, how are you doing? How are things on the Upper West Side of Manhattan? So I said, man, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, it's like people are walking around like they all got shot in the stomach with a shotgun, just stunned, angry, depressed. Like, what? And couldn't have been any different. So we were talking about it, and I said, David, what if we got 20 people together in South Lebanon in 2 weeks in a church that you choose, and 10 of them would have just proudly and happily, voted for Donald Trump, and 10 of them would have happily and strongly voted for Hillary Clinton, and we get 20 people together. We'll spend 14 or 15 hours together over the course of a weekend, and we'll see if there's any way to bridge anything. So he said, great idea. Let's do it. So he went out and recruited the people. And then but we didn't know what we were going to do, really. And so we called up Bill Doherty, who's a professor at the University of Minnesota. We both knew him. And he comes from that marriage counseling thing that I mentioned earlier, where he thought that families in crisis, that some of the tools could be used for social groups in crisis. So he kind of, on the fly, back of an envelope, developed a little protocol for first meeting was on Friday night, all day Saturday, then Sunday afternoon from like 2 to 5. So it was a really long time.
Yeah.
And we had no plans for, it was just, let's just see what happens. We didn't know this is the first of many. We had nothing. We had no ideas of any kind other than let's just have this experience. And it was just amazing. It was very powerful, and people felt very strongly about it. It was a time of really intense emotion, and it was like lightning in a bottle. It was really, really powerful. Some of the people who were at that very first meeting are like on our board today. That was a very, I would say a number of us felt like it was a life-changing experience. So, but we had no plan. So the only thing we could think of was to have another one.
Yeah. Which
we did. About 3 weeks later, 120 miles up the road in, blanking on the name of the little town. And the same thing happened. Really powerful experience. So then we're like, well, good grief, what are we going to do now? And we had no plans at all. So we were just, the three of us were sitting there talking, and we said, well, what if we did like 40 or 50 of them? How would we do that?
Yeah.
And I remember saying, well, let's get a bus. That seems like the cheapest and most efficient way to get around the country. We can kind of pretend like we're rock and roll, or, musicians, we're on a tour, So, kind of a fantasy, right? You get to go see America. So like Walt Whitman meets, Kerouac or something. So so that's what we did. We got a foundation to pay for, God knows why they did it, because we were the most disorganized people in the world. And we just, we had 3 or 4 people who had been to one of those workshops, got on a bus with us, and we drove around the country for 6 weeks. And the only way we would have people to meet with in these towns was if we began to get a little media coverage, because it was kind of an innovative thing, and everybody, so people would call us up and say, "Oh, could you come to our town?" We said, "Well, we happen to have a bus. Yes, we'll do that." So we did that for 40 of these workshops. We did 40. Bill and I chaired every one of them. David was the organizer of them. He got the people there. So that took us to the fall of 2017. And Bill said, as fun as this is, we just can't spend the rest of our lives wandering around on a bus doing one after these. What if we trained other people to do them? How would we do that? Let's make them pay out of their own pocket to come to an inconvenient place, stay in a hotel they have to pay for, and listen to 8 hours a day of me lecturing them on how to do these workshops, and then have to sign an agreement to run at least 4 and to be a part of a rigorous evaluation. They'll not get a penny for it. They'll get no recognition of any kind. They'll just do it because they care about their country. We said, sounds great. 100 people took us up on that offer. We had 5 of these things around the country. Bill lost his voice. And we would go from town to town. We had one in Nashville. We had one in Minneapolis. I don't even remember that. We had one in Virginia. And so we had 100 people that were ready to go do these. And we had no idea if they'd actually go do it. Would they work? Well, it worked. They did a great job, and they're still, now we have, I think we have about 600 doing them now. Today, we have 1,400 total volunteers, because we also have some to organize the work. We have one conservative, one liberal, each brings 7 to the event. And there's a whole protocol. And now that a lot of it's online, there's a whole group of volunteers that make that happen. So we did that another year, and we said, well, okay, we're going to see what happens. So by the end of 2018, I think we had done, several hundred of these things. And we had to fill out evaluations, and they said, this is meaningful. And so then we said, well, let's start chapters. And let's charge people dues to join and form chapters. How much are the dues? $12. What are we going to call chapters? We're going to call them alliances. So you go to the workshop, you pay $12, you're a member, then you go in the community, start an alliance, as long as you do it paired up with somebody from the other. We use the term red and blue. So if you're blue, you have to do it with the red, blue. So they started doing that. And what was so amazing about it is that people just stepped up to do this. I'm the president of the organization. I co-founded the organization with Bill and David. We were the only 3 people involved in it for a long time. I co-chaired the first 40 of these meetings. I knew everybody. But now I meet people all the time who hardly know who I am, and I don't know them at all. And they say, "Oh, braver angels, and we're doing this many workshops this month in Wyoming and in Idaho, and here's our group, and we're excited, and this is our challenge." I'm like, really? Like, well, you people are great. Well, who are you? Like, oh, I'm the president. Like, really? Yeah. Like, I never met these people. Yeah. They're all volunteers, and they're all just doing it, and it's wonderful. It's like I don't know, it's like you're standing on a corner, you just feel a wind start blowing, So no, you're not so there's no plan. There's no strategy. It just began to happen. Almost despite us. You know what I mean? We were just trying to kind of keep up with the wind. Yeah. Really. Yeah. That's the best way I know how to describe it. And then we had a convention, and then, I'm not saying there was no leadership. Obviously there's some leadership, but overwhelmingly, this is a grassroots social movement style feeling. I mean, if you read accounts of other social movements, I mean, as a Southerner, of course, I've done a lot of studying of the civil rights movement, and of course, civil rights movement is much more important than what we're doing, I think. But you know, that same phenomenon, where the leaders of it, I had no idea. I mean, people would just, you know, some student at Fisk University decides they're going to have a sit-in at the local lunch counter.
Yeah.
Dr. King didn't know about that. None of them knew. They just happened, you know?
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that to it. It's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, you used this analogy earlier, but it sounds like a form of civic therapy in a lot of ways.
It is.
Advocating for lost causes.
It really is. We call it civic friendship.
You know,
sometimes we call it patriotic
last
empathy.
defender of a dying breed.
The idea that, you know, it's not like this here. People really want to do this. So, yeah, it's, I've never been a part of anything like it, really.
You said previously in the conversation that for many people, it's a life-changing experience being at these. And I'm wondering why and what seems to happen over, I mean, 14 hours over a weekend. It's a significant amount of time to be around people voluntarily in this era who you know disagree with you, possibly vehemently, about something that you cherish.
Almost definitely vehemently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happens in a format like that? And I'm interested in any details you provided in terms of the structure of how you set up these weekends. But what tends to be so meaningful? How do people seem to change, if at all, during those weekends, during the sessions?
The most common one we do now is 7 hours over the course of a Saturday. We'll also have a number of variations on the workshops now that some focus on skill building, some focus on other things. So we have a kind of a more complex menu now. But the one we started with and the one that's still the most common is what we call red-blue.
Yeah.
So it's the typical thing would be 7 or 8 reds, 7 or 8 blues, each one recruited by one of their people, you know. So, and then you would have 2 moderators, 1 red, 1 blue, who've been trained to do this, but they're doing it as volunteers, you know. And the purpose of what change it, what people change, we do what was called checkouts. So at the end of the time, you do a brief checkout, and the checkout question is, what are you taking away from today? That's the checkout question. And the most common answer that we get is, we're less divided than we've been told. Usually people say that, many people use that exact sentence. We're less divided than we've been told. So I started going up to people afterwards and said, well, who told you? And they usually had the media, or they say other things, but they say, like, in other words, I thought coming into this that I would have nothing in common with these people, that they'd be crazy. I thought they were crazy, you know. A lot of people would say, and people on both sides would say this, they would say, well, I didn't think this would work because I'm a person who likes to use facts and logic and reason, and these other people don't. So I'd have a hard time talking to them. A lot of people said that. I use my mind, they use their feelings. We'll never communicate. So it's that, and you know what happens to you when you experience an enemy, a perceived enemy, as someone that you can actually have some flicker of friendship with, something, it literally lights up your brain. I mean, there's really a biochemical aspect of this. The pleasure centers in your brain warm up. I mean, you get a good feeling. It's almost like it's I don't want to overstate it, but it's a little bit like taking a drug. Yeah. You get a buzz. I mean, you almost literally get a buzz. And so you want more. Yeah. And so it's not like, it's not like eat your peas. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, it was worth it because I learned, you know, like studied. No, you feel good about this. You know, you felt like, good grief, I've realized that these people are not nearly as bad as I thought they were. Some of them I actually liked. And we're going to meet again. We're going to become, and we call them Better Angels stories. We changed the name to Braver Angels. We call them Braver Angels story. And when we say it's a Braver Angel story, we mean two people who thought they were going to be enemies who are now friends.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, our last convention, I mean, just to take any one of a jillion examples, I mean, Graceland College in Leona, Iowa, the very conservative head of Young Republicans and the very progressive head of the Young Democrats became friends through Braver Angels, and they hitchhiked together to our convention. And they're like buddies. They're buddies today, right now. They're buddies. They're friends because of this kind of experience. And so that's the magic of it. That's the fundamental it's the belief that the person that you are afraid of, you don't have to be, and you can actually have a good relationship with, notwithstanding the fact that you disagree about a lot of things. That's it. That's the thing we're looking for.
Yeah.
We're looking for it to happen institutionally and in other ways too. But if you put it in a pot and just boiled it until you got the kind of crystalline essence of it, that's what it would be. And it lights people up, unexpectedly, because they're thinking, they walk into it like, oh, what on earth, It doesn't happen to everybody. I mean, we had one guy who said, he said that his checkout was, he said, I came into this session suspecting that these other people were assholes, and now I know they are. That was his checkout, but that was rare. He was an angry guy, and somebody had a bad conversation. So, but the overwhelming majority of people, it's like I actually like these people. I can think of them as neighbors rather than kind of these alien creatures, because part of what you hear now in so many conversations, if you ask people about politics, they won't say, they won't just say, well, these conservatives have bad ideas. They'll say,
yeah,
I can't believe anybody would think this. I can't even imagine it. I can't imagine how anybody with an ounce of intelligence or moral sensitivity could possibly believe this. And they're bewildered at the weirdness of what they perceive to be these other people. It's like incomprehensible.
Yeah.
And they keep saying, can you tell me what this is all about? And we say, well, actually, we can. Because you go to this thing, you get to talk to them. I say, have you done that? Well, no, not really. They haven't. Except, maybe they have a crazy uncle or something.
Yeah.
And so that's it sounds a little simplistic, but that's really the formula. And I don't know any way, I really think it's the only way to change the country. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In other words, for people who say, well, that's all well and good, but there's a lot of Americans out there. And what about the people in Washington? What about people in the media? Well, yeah, that's true. We're thinking about that. We are beginning to work with those people. We do podcasts now. We try to model different things in the media. So it's not like we're just naive, but I honestly, I don't know what's going to change the country on this other than what I just said, In other words, I don't think there's a way to short circuit this fundamental relationship building aspect of it. Because otherwise you're just going to, what are we going to do? Some smart people are going to meet at the Aspen Institute and come up with a plan.
Yeah.
No, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Some clever person in the media is going to come up with a television show. No, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Some people in Congress are going to say, we've seen the light.
Yeah.
Now we're going to start doing. No, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's only going to happen when society as a whole begins to change. And then there'll be some people in the media. Then there will be some people in Congress. Then there will be some clever people that go to conferences at fancy retreat centers. But that top-down, a top-down strategy, I don't think will work on this in this case.
Yeah.
So
it seems like the more we can incentivize our fellow citizens to go to a session like this, to view it almost like a civic responsibility, a duty to be a good citizen, to partake in a session where they're engaging with people they disagree with is something that should be lauded and incentivized. And
you don't have to be passive. That's the thing. You don't have to think of democracy as consuming information from the media.
Yeah.
And it's even more than voting. I mean, voting is obviously incredibly important facet of democracy. But I think we need a more, just a little bit more robust conception of what it means to be a citizen.
Yeah.
And getting out in it. Getting out in it, get a little dirt on your shoes. Engaging with your fellow citizens about the business of democracy. That, we ought to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And there have been times in our history when we've been better at this than others, where people understood citizenship as not this passive thing of, oh, I have an opinion about climate change, or I have an opinion about the wall. Well, that's all well and good, but how about actually being a citizen in the sense of going out and engaging with other citizens in the work of democracy? How about that?
Yeah.
And if you do that, you are going to find, and I'm sorry I keep coming back to this, but it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is not like eat your peas. This is not like, you might not want to serve on jury duty, but this is part of your civic. No, well, actually, all that's true, but you're really going to like this,
Yeah.
which people do,
And we're getting relatively close to the end of the conversation, but I first of all, I should just say, I think what you're doing is extraordinarily important. And
thanks.
I said this before we started recording, that I really admire what you're doing and what the people who are involved in Braver Angels are up to. And I think you're totally right that this has to be a bottom-up thing and not a top-down thing. I think that's the only solution that would actually help citizens convince themselves that there's a lot of the fear that they may have in their minds of people who they disagree with is just BS.
If you think about the things that have really changed the country, it's typically, not always, but it's typically been, that's what it's been.
Yeah.
It's been, it's been what the Constitution calls "we the people." It's been that for better or worse in America, this is how things work.
Yeah.
Tocqueville once famously said, he said, if you want to make a change in France, you go to the court. If you're the king, the king's court. If you want to make a change in Britain, you go to a man of rank, the aristocracy.
No.
If you want to make a change in America, you form an association with your fellow citizens.
No.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. A few last questions. One is, when people come to these sessions and they come away, and even though you said there was a man who confirmed that he had suspected people were assholes prior to it, and then that was confirmed after spending 7 hours with people that he disagreed with. What do you think people are disabused of during these sessions? That what do they see or experience that tends to come away with the conclusion, the line that you said is the most common takeaway, which is that we're a lot less divided than I thought we were. We have a lot more in common than I realized. Why? What do you think is happening to them?
Probably, I think the main thing is that you come to believe that these enemies of yours are in good faith. Mm. They're decent people. They're sincere. They're trying to do what they think is best for their country. That they're not just playing some tricky, they're not They're not hypocrites. They're not saying they do one thing. They have a hidden agenda. They're like you are. They're sincere. They have good. You learn that they're in good faith. You come to believe that. The other thing you see is that you don't agree on policy, but there are some shared values. That's the other big thing. Like, we have a big part of the exercise, the big part of the day where the question is, what are some of your life experiences that have shaped your political views? And you listen to other people say, there's a whole structure to this, but, and so, you get a guy who'll say, well, my grandparents came over here from such and such a country, and they worked really hard. They didn't have anything. They worked really hard. They built a business. They pulled themselves up, by their own initiative and hard work. And that's what I believe in. And I don't like people to tell me that, whether it should be replaced by some other arrangements, And so let's say I'm not that kind of person politically, but I could see, there's something to admire there.
Yeah.
There's some values that you can say, yeah, I kind of like that story about working hard and building up something. And, anyway, you see that some values are the same, even though the policy agreements are still there. And another thing that we see over and over again is that sometimes people, I would say lots of times, people think that here's how the logic goes. I don't like the wall. You like the wall. You tell me, I think we need a wall. I'm thinking to myself, God, Dan thinks we should build a wall on the southern border. I wonder why he thinks that. Well, what will happen if the wall gets built is that a lot of people will suffer. Children will be separated from their parents. People who need to come to this country won't be able to. There will just be a lot of suffering. Therefore, what Dan wants is a lot of suffering. That's what he's in favor of.
Yeah.
Dan wants that.
Yeah.
How crazy is Dan?
Yeah.
What kind of wacko sociopath is he for wanting to produce suffering?
Yeah.
But if I talk to you about the wall, it turns out that you don't want to produce suffering. You have reasons that have to do. So the thing is, the false step in my mind is, I project that the result of your proposal is going to be bad. Therefore, I think you want the bad thing. That's almost never true.
Yeah.
And so the only way for me to know that that's not true is for you to tell me that's not true and for me to see that you're sincere. So this happens all day during these conversations. Like, oh, really? Yeah. So Dan likes the wall, but it's not that he hates immigrants, or that it's not all the things I thought were his motives, or they're not his motives.
Yeah.
That just opens up all kinds of. Can I just tell you one quick thing?
Of course.
You asked for an example. I meant to say this earlier, but the first thing we do in these things is called. I think it's called Beyond Stereotypes. Out when we first started, that's what we called it. And what happens is, the conservative reds and blues they go into separate rooms. And each one of them makes a list of all the stereotyped opinions that the other group has of them. So if I'm a red, I'm going to say, what do liberals think about me? What are their stereotyped opinions of me? And me and my fellow, we're going to make a list. They literally make a list. And they really like it because it's like, and it also just gets out the worst stuff, right? It just gets it all right out there. So then the next part of the thing is, what is it about these things that are exaggerated or are unfair? So invariably, this almost never changes. The first thing that what conservatives believe that liberals believe about them is that they're racists. This is at the top of every single list. So then they say, okay, what do we think about this stereotype is exaggerated or unfair? Why do we think it's wrong for them to call us racist?
Yeah.
Then, final part is there a kernel of truth to it? So you have to look inward, right? So usually on the liberal side, it's usually almost always baby killer is on the list.
Yeah.
And we don't just slaughtering babies is fine with us.
Yeah.
Well, why is that wrong? Is there a kernel of truth? It's a powerful, powerful exercise because then they get together and they talk about it. And you can just see, first of all, every bad thing that you're thinking about me, I already know that you're thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's all out there, right? I don't have to wait for you to call me a bad name. I know that this is in your mind. And so it just kind of clears the air, And Bill, who designed this thing, didn't add the kernel of truth part. But what happened was in one of the early workshops, I was in it, and there was the conservative group, the red group, invariably racist was the number one. Why is that wrong? Why is that an exaggerated? Well, we're not racist. We believe in individual, color of your, content, not color of your skin, but content of your character. They had a whole lot of reasons why they weren't racist. Kernel of truth. Silence. Some guy gets up and says, well, here's what I think a kernel of truth is. Most conservatives are not racists, but most racists are conservatives. I think that's what I think, and I'm a conservative.
Yeah.
So they go to the group. This guy gets up and does his thing, and when he says that, you could have heard a pin drop, because not only is he saying, we know that you think we're racists. I want to tell you with my voice full of emotion why you should not label us racists. And I want to say there's something real in this that we can see and we're willing to tell you.
Yeah.
It is powerful. It is such a powerful experience because you can just see, I can breathe, This is real. I'm having a real conversation with people that seem to be in goodwill. They're willing to look inward. They don't think they have perfect answers to everything. They don't think their movement is perfect. They don't think their agenda, they know that we're all fallible people here and we're trying to relate together as citizens. And it's one of those things where you just, it changes the way you think about the other, and for a lot of people, it gives them the ability to be more, I guess, honestly introspective about their own thing. Because they're not in a defensive crouch.
Yeah.
They realize that they can admit to some uncertainty, or to admit to a flaw, or admit to something that they're not proud of in their group, and nobody's going to cut their head off, right? Yeah. Because the other group's doing the same thing. And I'll tell you, man, it is a powerful experience. And you people bond. That people feel like, God, here we are, citizens who love our country, really talking to one another.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds, you used this analogy earlier, but it sounds like a form of civic therapy in a lot of ways. And
it is. Yeah, it really is. We call it civic friendship. Sometimes we call it patriotic empathy. It's the idea that sometimes they call it higher partisanship. Yeah, it's the idea that we're partisans. We all have a candidate we're going to fight for. We have a set of beliefs we believe in. We believe in them strongly. So in that sense, we're partisans. Yeah, but there is also a higher partisanship where you, in addition to fighting for your candidate or your cause, there is a higher sense in which you have to transcend that for something that is shared, a higher partisanship, and people respond to that because we're not asking them to give up their partisan. We're not saying, you don't have to turn into milquetoast. You don't have to never show emotion. You don't have to water down your views. You don't have to say that you're a centrist. You don't have to do any of that.
Yeah.
You can bleed for Bernie. You can go to your Trump rally. You can volunteer for Joe Biden. You can do all those things. But there's also a higher partisanship that says we still are one country. Yeah. We still have to share this country, and we have to, ultimately, it sounds really maybe not so tough-minded, but ultimately you have to have care for other people. There has to be some form of love, some form of caring for the other. I mean, it sounds like Sunday school, but it's the truth. It's just the truth.
Yeah. Well, in the era of the incentives, we seem to have walked into a time period in American history where the incentives are from the media or the technology. The major forces in our culture are towards division. And this is a pushback against that. It's a ground bottom up option to push back against some of those forces. And I want to close by making a comment and then asking a final question to you. The first comment is, I have no doubt that, and you alluded to this earlier, that our leaders, our elected political leaders, might also greatly benefit from something like this because they're the talking heads propagating a lot of this nonsense, a lot of the ideas of division. There seems to be an incentive structure for them also to double down on that mentality. And I wonder if some of that would get mitigated by going through some sort of intensive weekend or even a Saturday. And so I hope, just as a citizen, that you guys, are able to potentially make some headway there and create a model, maybe starting at a state government level, that could potentially bubble up into a federal, or I don't know. I'm sure it's something that
we've started doing it. We call it braver politics, and we're saying we can take our model into the halls of power, and people can benefit. And we had recently a Republican and Democratic member of Congress did this. They sent their staffs to have a joint red-blue workshop. So the staffs actually talked to one another and became friends across the line. The staff members
never happens.
Staff play a very important role. They're like kind of the, if you think of the members as the doctors, they're the staff are the nurses. They have a lot of power. They have a lot of influence. So, and we've also doing Representative Dean Phillips, who's a member of the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress and a very strong Braver Angels supporter, is having Bill is leading a series of what they call common ground district meetings, where they bring together Republicans and Democrats, equal numbers, carefully, and go through a structure of talking about issues in common, starting with local issues. And Dean Phillips, the representative and the Republican who's going to be doing it soon, they're just sitting there participating like everybody else. So Bill told me that one of them, they're like 10 members of the, 5 and 5, but one of them's the member of Congress. Yeah. He's just sitting there, right, talking like everybody else. Bill said that a guy was talking, just a guy, and the congressman, as congressmen are wont to do, interrupted and started to give a little speech about something or other because he thought it was important for him to say something. And Bill said, sorry, Daryl has the floor now. Yeah. And sorry. So when they're sitting around that table, they're just another citizen. Now, they're also a member of Congress, and people respect them. And obviously, they have certain knowledge that is special. And they have, nobody's trying to say they're not a member of Congress. But at that point, they're citizens. And it's powerful. They're going to do, he wants to do like 20 of them all over his district and build up a body of knowledge where, these people, about half of whom voted for him and half of whom didn't, are actually beginning to build some common values around some of the issues that he'll have to be voting on. So they're not lobbying him. They're not they're not picketing him at a town hall, but it's a form of, for him, it's a form of constituent communication that he never gets.
Yeah.
And there's some other things too, but what you're saying is, we're figuring out how to do that now. And these people like it.
Yeah.
They're not, some of them tell us, they say, we are in a toxic work environment.
Yeah.
We worked really hard to get this job. We raised a lot of money. We campaigned. Sometimes it's a culmination of many years of work and aspiration. We get here and we find out we're in a toxic environment.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
We hate it.
Yeah.
We don't get to do what we were elected here to come here to do. We do other things. We prance around in front of cameras in order to pose and scream and yell, and we dial for dollars.
Yeah.
And we don't spend any time legislating. I mean, that's almost literally true. And so they're sick of it. They're sick of it.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't be?
Yeah.
So they're looking for a way to get out. They're looking for those pleasure centers to light up in their brain. They actually, most of them came here because they care about the country and would like to make it better. So give them a chance.
Yeah. It's healthier. It's healthier for everybody if you can bridge that.
Yeah.
Last question I want to ask you is about people who are listening to this or watching this who want to get involved or want to help. What is the best way, from your perspective, for people to help the organization now? And for people that want to go to one of these weekend sessions or become a volunteer, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah. Well, we're only as good as the people who volunteer. This is a volunteer movement. And so what you can do if you are interested in helping is go to our website, www.braverangels.org. And the first thing you do is join. You click where it says join. And you can join in about 45 seconds. It's $12, right? So it's not a lot. So you join. And the reason you join is because we're a member-run organization. We're not dependent upon, what I mean? So it's the people. Once you join, you're really, you're helping. It's your organization. Yeah. So then once you join, you can see whatever state you're in. You can, if you're joining online, you can see the calendar of activities that you can participate in. If you want to be in a workshop, if you want to be skills training, if you want to. We have a bunch of stuff now. We have film discussion groups. We have music. I mean, there's a lot you can do. So you just pick anything you want to do. Nothing costs money. It's all, once you're a member, you're involved. Then I would suggest first you go to something. Yeah. See if you like it. You will like it. People like this. Yeah. Then if you really want to step up, you become a volunteer. You volunteer to do something. Maybe you want to be trained into run one of these workshops. Maybe you wanted to learn how to chair a debate, a Braver Angels debate. Maybe you have a certain skill in the media or in writing or in tech or what. You have something you can contribute, and you look at the opportunities depending on where you live, depending on what your skill is, depending on what your passion is. And you can become, we have about 1,400 active volunteers now. So after you sign up, we'll have 1,401. And when your neighbor does it, it'll be 1,402. And eventually we will build up to thousands and thousands, and we'll change the country. That's the plan. Yeah. So it's pretty straightforward. If you join, then you decide how you want to become active. And there's every state has 2 coordinators, one red, one blue. They're all volunteers. We have district people, all volunteers. We have a national field office, all volunteer. Well, 80% volunteers. And so what you're doing is becoming one more citizen leader in a national movement of citizen leaders.
Yeah.
And it's that's what will be something that will be, I think, very meaningful for your life. And you will be doing something that absolutely will help your country.
Yeah. As a citizen of this country, as somebody who loves America, I want to just say, I think I speak for millions in articulating or conveying an appreciation for what you're up to and what you're doing, and a hope for the growth and the success of what Braver Angels is doing. I think this is one of the most important conversations I've ever had. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this and to go into such detail. This place gives me hope, and I really do appreciate what you're doing. And I hope you guys kick ass. I really do.
Thanks, man. I really those are wonderful. It's great to hear, because I appreciate the chance to be on the program, because I was mentioning before we started that it's rare to be able to have a really serious conversation, usually because we're living in an age of sound bites and quick in and outs. So I think what you're doing, which is pioneering a form of communication it's kind of the Braver Angels way of doing things. You establish relationship. Everybody gets to share a little bit of who they are, and it's not just boom, 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 quick, talking points, Yeah. So anyway, I right back at you in terms of some real admiration of what you're doing.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, take care, man.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Keep Talking. If you are finding value in this podcast, please consider supporting the show on Patreon at patreon.com/keeptalkingpodcast. I truly appreciate all of you who are supporting the show.